Reducing gun violence, that's the goal as the state looks to give a boost to grassroots community organizations. We'll hear from a state official on the progress being made so far. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray here in Albany. State lawmakers looking to partner up with community organizations in an effort to continue to reduce gun violence across the state. According to new data from the state, communities across New York are seeing double-digit increases in gun violence in the first half of the year. This as the state reports seizing over 4,000 illegal guns just in the first half of the year. In an effort to help end the violence, Project RISE, which stands for Respond, Invest, Sustain, and Empower, will be allocating $2 million to 7 cities around the state. That funding will then go to community-based organizations focusing on mental health, mentoring, and victim services. That funding, just part of the over $300 million the state has set aside in the budget to address this very issue. Joining us now to give additional insight into how communities are looking to address community gun violence, Joe Popkin. He's the Executive Deputy Commissioner for the State Division of Criminal Justice Services. Joe, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Let's
talk about the issue of gun violence. You know, it gets a lot of attention in the media. We're guilty of leading newscasts whenever a gun goes off. How are the numbers doing? How are we doing with gun violence in the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously during the pandemic, gun violence surged across the state. Last year, we saw about a 15% reduction outside of New York City, 17% in New York City. And thankfully this year, we've actually seen a rapid decrease in gun violence. And so the governor's been talking about this, but we're down across the state about 30%, 28%, both in New York City and outside of New York City.
That's a huge drop. Is it because it had an almost artificial spike that the drop is so big, or is something else going on that these numbers are really coming down?
I think across the country, we hear that gun violence, pretty much doubled from 2019 to 2020. And I think our decline from 2021 to 2022 and now into 2023 is outpacing much of the rest of the country. And so I think within the division, a lot of our programs are working to empower law enforcement and community groups to tackle it.
Talk about that. What are some of the programs you think are working that the state has?
Yeah, so our signature program for law enforcement is called GIVE, Gun-Involved Violence Elimination. And so the governor has doubled the funding to $36 million. It's going to 21 counties, 28 police departments, and it's funding evidence-based strategies that really tackle the people and the places that are contributing to gun violence, which is really the minority of places and a small amount of people in each city. We also, for law enforcement, have a expanding network of crime analysis centers, and those are really becoming the backbone of the state's ability to reduce gun violence because they allow information sharing between over 350 law enforcement agencies. And just last year alone, we saw 70,000 requests for service. Can you run this license plate? Can you identify this individual from social media? And those are really leading the law enforcement efforts to drive down crime.
So it's not so much throwing a bunch of money and hiring a lot more cops. Maybe there's some of that, but also just the strategies that they're using to sort of weed out crimes or criminals.
Exactly. I mean, they're using evidence-based strategies, but also strategies that are rooted in the community. So procedural justice, for instance, making sure that their interactions are transparent and fair with everybody in the community, and using their resources to focus on the small amount of people and small amount of places that are driving gun violence.
That's a good point, too, because you get the impression that, oh, that neighborhood's bad. They have a lot of violence there. It's a small percentage that might be causing a lot of the trouble, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it could be as small in a city, in Troy, for instance, a city of 50,000, it could be as small as 20 or 25 people who are driving the violent crime that we see.
Does the bail reform fall into that? I know they did some tweaking with that as well, where we're not having turnstiles where people are committing crimes, going right back out and reoffending sometimes the same day?
Yeah, I think the governor over the last 2 legislative sessions has looked at the data and said, here's some tweaks that we need to make sure that this isn't a revolving door system. And at the same time, she's invested for the first time in a dramatic increase in pretrial services so that people, if they are released on supervision, there's actual services and programs that are going along with that.
She's got to be happy with the numbers, though, to see those decreases the way they're going. Do you throw more money at it now since this is working, or do you kind of leave it the way it is?
I won't speak for the governor, but I would say her strategy over last year and this year is let's look at the data, let's look where we are, and double down on what works. And so on the other side in the community, she's also provided us with funding for SNUG, street outreach workers, and Project RISE, which is empowering grassroots groups to make sure that they're repairing and responding to gun violence in their neighborhoods, to address the trauma, to address the lack of youth opportunities, families. So from her perspective, I think she's following the data and making investments and strategies that are proving to now work.
Yeah, I would think anyone with half a brain would know lack of opportunity for a young person would just breed them finding the wrong things to do. If there's things to keep them engaged, if there's jobs, that all helps these numbers come down, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the governor, even outside of DCJS's wheelhouse, she, I think, almost doubled the funding for summer youth employment opportunities to keep kids engaged outside the school year. She's been funding in childcare and after-school opportunities, and so I think it has to be a whole-of-state government approach, and that's the governor's approach so far has been, okay, let's make sure that we're addressing this as holistically as possible, because one solution in isolation isn't going to do it.
And last 30 seconds, we were talking off air about this a little bit. Parents also play a big role in this, don't they? Knowing what your kids are up to, kind of looking out for them, watching out, making sure they're home when they belong to be, when they need to be home, especially late at night on a weeknight. They shouldn't be out running around.
Yeah, and I think that's where Project Rise. So in 7 cities, we took $2 million and said to the community groups, what do you need here? This isn't the state telling us, here you need to invest in these programs. What do you need? And they wanted to invest in mental health, mentorship opportunities, things that really address what families and youth need. All
right. We'll have to leave it there. Joseph Popkin, the Division of Criminal Justice Services, thank you for coming in today. We do appreciate having you with us on the show.
Thank you.
Former President Donald Trump once again indicted on criminal charges. When we come back, we'll speak with a legal expert on the legal next steps for the president and how this latest indictment will impact the other pending cases. If you've got a comment or story idea, please let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out right there on Twitter at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. A grand jury this week indicting President Trump and his allies as part of an investigation of the former president's alleged effort to overturn the 2020 election. The indictment charges Mr. Trump with multiple counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. This is now Donald Trump's 3rd indictment. He was previously charged for allegedly falsifying business records in New York, and he's facing charges for allegedly holding on to classified documents found at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate. Joining us now to break down the latest legal trouble faced by the former president is Andrew Safranco, attorney with LaMarche Safranco Law Firm. Thank you for coming in, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Boy, to have these his lawyers on retainer must be very busy these days. We have 3 different indictments now. Just tossing this out of the, which one do you think is the strongest case against him right now, if you were defending him?
So I think the strongest case, against him is probably the document case down in Florida, where we can't figure out why he just wouldn't return the documents. And had those documents returned, there wouldn't have been any criminal charges. I think the case that has the most teeth, and if he were to be convicted, is this newest indictment out of Washington for all the dealings with respect to January 6th. Because if he does get convicted there, it then leads to what happened on January 6th, the riots, the deaths of civilians and police officers. So if he gets convicted on the New York State cases with respect to the business records, I wouldn't expect much of a sentence there, and similar with respect to the documents out of Florida. But this one, if he is to get convicted, has some teeth to it.
And let's talk about that, and we'll drill down a little bit. If you watch both sides arguing this case already, the legal experts on television, if you can follow them, one side say it's awful, the other side says, well, it's more of a free speech issue. We got to be careful. How would you argue this if you were defending him? That again, he's still a citizen. He's a right to believe something even if it's wrong.
Right. So I think what his defense team is going to do is going to argue twofold. One, that it's a First Amendment. He had a right to free speech. He had a right to challenge the elections. He had a right to say whatever that he wanted to say. And people can lie. That's not a crime in and of itself. And then I think the second aspect of it, where he's going to try to defend the new charges, is based upon, he's going to say, I had the advice of counsel. I relied on my lawyers. My lawyers told me that I could do this, and therefore I didn't have the culpable intent to commit a crime.
Do you think he'll try to get a motion to move it out of D.C., that general area, because it's so heavily as blue in terms of how they voted in the past, or is that a fool's errand trying to even get the judge to move it?
It's very hard to get a change of venue in a case. I think his defense team will try to do everything that they can do, but there's really not a venue, you know, in the country where people aren't going to have heard of this. There's going to be a really detailed voir dire jury questioning process in order to get down so they can get jurors that can be fair and impartial.
What about the fact that we have a presidential election next year? Obviously, the prosecutor wants a quick trial. It would behoove Trump's team to say, well, slow down. You know, we're not going to rush into this thing. And then if they can get the clock to turn when we get to next spring, next summer, a few months from November, could a judge say, look, I'm going to set a hard date where we're not going to have him standing trial a month before people vote?
So any of those are all possibilities. So the prosecution will declare and say they're ready to go to trial. A trial date will be set on this newest, you know, case shortly, but and it'll probably be set for 90, 120 days out. But that's routine in federal cases. They always get set, and then typically once all the discovery gets moved, they enter into stipulations to extend the time and adjust the time. So I doubt that the case is going to be tried very quickly. Certainly, it's going to be very interesting because Trump has been saying both things. He's been saying, I'm ready, I want a quick trial,
Sure.
I don't want this to affect the election, and now his lawyers are going on saying, hey, slow down, you know, this can't be a rush to justice, we need time to prepare our defense and adequately go to trial.
Does it help his lawyers where he can say to or he or she say to the judge, now, Your Honor, if this was just this one case, it would still take us a while, but we got this thing in New York City and we got this thing down in Florida. You know, I don't know how many battles you think we can fight at once, Your Honor. We need a lot more time because we're being attacked on 3 different fronts. Maybe 4 if Georgia comes through.
Correct, and that all of those, you know, are going to be argued. And right now, you know, New York is set for March of next year. The Florida case is set for May. You know, when this newest case gets set is unknown, and then when Georgia potentially could come down any day now, I think there's going to be a lot of time before there's an actual trial date.
I know prosecutors love when people settle, and they can, because number one, they get to check a box in the win column, but also it can help defense attorneys too to say, look, if we plead to this, you don't get that much. Do you get a sense in this case, knowing it's Donald Trump, there's not going to be any kind of a settlement?
I would be very surprised knowing it's Donald Trump, but the biggest, you know, problem that he faces with respect to, even if he were considering a plea, is in federal court. It's not like state court where you can go in and enter into a straight bargain. Hey, if I plead guilty, I'm going to get a specific sentence. In federal court, each crime is attributable to a number which becomes a recommended sentencing guideline. So if he were to plead, he would know the maximum, which appears to be 20 years, what his requested guidelines would be or recommended sentence would be, but there's no guarantees. So if he were to plead in federal court, he wouldn't know what his sentence would be until the day he's sentenced, and with all those unknowns, I would be shocked if he were to plead guilty.
If you watch cable news, certain channels keep bringing up Hunter Biden and his case and his father and Joe Biden. That's fine for a political show, but that really has nothing to do with these cases, right? The judge is not going to entertain whataboutism, but what about this, what about that guy, you know?
Absolutely. They're going to make this really cut and dry, and the judges that are trying these cases are going to really maintain a strict courtroom and really hold people to the evidence and the charges and allegations in the specific cases, and not really try to let the other cases come in to factor into what's going on, and whether he's in New York, Washington, or Florida.
And the last question, they say, you know, this should be criminal, not political, but it's hard to pull the politics out of this, isn't it?
There's no question about it, and what really is going to be interesting is not necessarily just what happens with these cases. We're going to be talking about this for years, right? Assume he does get convicted. What happens the next time there's a Republican president? Are they going to pardon him? Are they going to give him clemency? All of these issues are going to be going on for years, whether he's acquitted or convicted.
Well, I had heard, if it was accurate, he had an option not to show up this week to the arraignment on these most recent charges. He could have done it over Zoom or whatever, but he chose to be there. It seems like he runs towards the fire and the spotlight sometimes because it's Donald Trump.
He absolutely likes to do it, and for his lawyers, they've got to not be liking him, you know, antagonizing people and going on Twitter and other social media accounts responding. You know, typically you tell your clients you don't want them to be talking, let us talk, you know, for you and not incite anything. But I think Donald Trump does what Donald Trump wants to do.
Yeah, I was thinking that yesterday when he stopped earlier in the week before he got on the plane, he turns to those microphones. His lawyers must have been going, please don't say the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're saying, please don't speak, please don't do anything, and he's doing what what he wants to do.
Yeah, there's an old saying in our business, journalism, silence can be misunderstood but never misquoted. So, I guess silence is sometimes golden, right?
Exactly, and in our business, we always say, I've never had a client convicted for keeping their mouth shut.
Good point. Andrew Franco, thanks for coming and talking to us about this important case.
Great, thank you for having me.
We'll have you back, sure, as things develop in all of this. The healthcare industry is set to receive a big investment from the state. This as they continue to face staffing shortages. When we come back, details on what the funding could mean for hospitals and the quality of care in the state. If you've got a comment or story idea, let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also find us right there on Twitter. Reach out on Twitter, WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Upstate hospitals will be getting a financial boost starting October. Federal funds will be providing $1 billion every year for hospitals to use as they see fit. Capitol correspondent Emil Taligi has the latest.
Better health care, addressing the doctor and nurse shortage, which we've seen so much for. Smoother operations, decreased wait times, more telemedicine, so much more. It's just great news.
New York Senator Chuck Schumer says for years, upstate New York has struggled with low Medicare reimbursement, making it difficult for hospitals to pay higher wages, hire new employees, and retain staff. Some employees even moving out of state to take up healthcare positions that pay more.
This is going to mean more jobs for upstate New York and more health care, better health care for upstate New York.
Gary Fitzgerald, president of the Iroquois Healthcare Association, says this is something advocates have been working on for 15 years. He says the wage index for upstate New York was not appropriate compared to other parts of the country.
Hospitals during the pandemic and certainly after we come out of the pandemic really saw significant losses. And so this will help stem the losses and help stop the closing of services. Hopefully this influx of cash will help hospitals to make ends meet.
Here is how that money will be split up. The Capital Region receiving $192 million, Western New York $170 million, the Finger Lakes and Rochester receiving $242 million. The hospitals should start receiving that money by October. Reporting in Albany, I'm El Talegi.
Turning to the ongoing migrant situation now, the state has received some 90,000 of asylum seekers from the southern border, with many now being bused to communities outside of New York City. While the state will be covering some of the expenses for these migrants, including housing, one lawmaker says schools will need more state aid to help meet the needs of these newly arrived migrant students.
So what I'm asking of the governor is simply do what's right. You passed a budget with funding for these communities, which doesn't live up to 68 new children who have special needs being assimilated into areas of Rotterdam School District, Schenectady School District, Colony School Districts, and wherever this is going to stop.
Over $100 million in state funding will be going towards education and mental health services to help students recover from the pandemic. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine telling us more now about this funding that public schools and BOCES can apply for.
At the State Education Department in Albany, Governor Kathy Hochul announced $108 million in grants, helping kids with learning loss from the pandemic.
$100 million will go directly to school districts and BOCES to hire more teachers with specialized experience in managing and counteracting learning loss, because we have to stop the hemorrhaging there. Also pinpoint where children have fallen behind, how to get them specialized assistance to get caught up.
Of this money, $8.3 million will be going towards helping students with their mental health.
It was not something you expected when you were growing up, most of you, that you need a mental health professional in school. But school districts now need this. It's now as basic as having a reading or writing teacher.
The money will help expand school-based mental health clinics across the state so students can address trauma the pandemic caused.
That academic slide is completely compounded by the loss, the isolation, the lack of socialization during COVID, and especially the middle school and the teens really have suffered with that.
The New York United Teachers Union is happy school districts will be receiving more funding.
These grants are going to allow our districts to hire more staff so that we can identify student needs before it becomes a crisis.
Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
Stick around, we'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit. Finally on Empire State Weekly, New York State's health department reporting a growing number of new hospitalizations connected to the coronavirus. According to recent data, new COVID-19 admissions increased by 22% at the start of this month. New COVID cases are also up, with the state now averaging over 800 new cases a day statewide. Department of Health recommends taking those familiar old steps to avoid getting sick, including cleaning frequently the areas you touch a lot, wearing a mask if you'd like, and getting vaccinated or boosted. We'll be sure to keep an eye on the latest guidance from the state and those rising numbers. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray in Albany. Stay healthy. We'll see you here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of the Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across the great state of New York.